GM everyone, we're back with another Touch Grass episode. Today we have with us Evin from Billions Network. We recently did a pod with on the camp team. Uh, we with Nirav, and we wanted to talk about the airdrop, how the verification system works, and we want to do a separate episode on the whole topic itself because I think it's a little misunderstood how it all works, how teams work with different projects, and how they do airdrops and general verification in crypto. So yeah, super excited to have you, Evan. How are you?
GM, it's another beautiful day on chain. Thank you guys so much for having me today. And thank you to our wonderful listeners for taking time out of your busy days to join us.
Awesome. Before we get into our discussion here, why don't you give a quick intro about yourself, how you got into crypto, how you started Billions, and what were you doing before?
Certainly. So, my name is Evan. I'm the co founder and CEO here at Billions Network. And my adventures on the chain started a little while ago, about 15 years ago, back when we just called it Bitcoin. I had an amazing computer science professor who introduced me to the Bitcoin white paper as a student in the United States. I was very interested in decentralized networks and public key cryptography, and in how we could coordinate human beings at scale using decentralized technology, which today sounds like a pretty commonplace interest for those in the blockchain space. But at the time, it was pretty edgy and pretty different, back around 2010, 2011. So my career has wound through a variety of human-centered design practices. Started off working in technical content, helping teams like IBM bring products like Watson to market in the earlier days of our recent AI history. I then worked on connected hardware, so things like vehicle to vehicle mesh networks for self driving cars, connected home hardware, like the first connected toothbrush, connected mirrors, and things like that. And then worked with another one of my computer science professors at a company called Berkshire Hathaway in Omaha, Nebraska, building out insurance and reinsurance products. So wore a suit and learned all about the trad world there. And it was around 2017 that I was really excited by the evolution of Ethereum and started working at a company called Consensus. It was building out the ecosystem of Ethereum. And so spent a little over 4 years there helping to open new markets, bring Ethereum to enterprise practices, and to further develop our capabilities on chain around identity and verification. So then started a venture-backed entity in 2022. My first experience as a founder, building in the data verification space. And then in 2024, we were acquired by my now co-founders and colleagues, and sort of brought together our teams. And then in March of this year, sort of end of February, beginning of March this year, we introduced Billions Network to the world. So I guess my interest in verification and identity comes both from a love for decentralized computing, but also a recognition that for identity systems, for systems that coordinate between humans and machines, we need to know more about one another, especially when payments and access control are involved. And so that brings us to today.
Awesome. I think before we get into the so much of the how it works and stuff, like can you kind of give me like a rundown of verification systems in crypto, how they are being used, where they are being used, and you said payments, identity. We haven't seen them kind of enshrined into any of the protocols at this moment. Why do you think like it hasn't kind of taken off yet?
Bro, this stuff is hard. Maybe to give a little more context on the Billions Network, we are the first universal human and AI network built with mobile first verification. So, what that means is that you can prove who you are, the fact that you are a human being, a live human being and not a bot, a unique human being who's different from me, an individual over a certain age, living in a certain location, all sorts of other traits and capabilities that you have as a unique individual. You can prove those pieces of information both on chain and online from the comfort of your own device, so the computer or phone that you already have. Now, our technology works in a privacy-preserving way so that Billions does not have the ability to see any of the sensitive data about you. Instead, that data stays safely on your device, and you are able to generate what are called zero-knowledge proofs, basically like a mathematically backed thumbs up or a green light, affirming that you have that requested trait and proving that to an application or a smart contract, so that you can, act on some in-app or on-chain logic, ensuring that whatever series of events is supposed to be tailored for that particular type of user is appropriately accessible to you. So in addition to being able to prove the identity and traits and capabilities of human beings, our team are also the creators of the Deep Trust framework. So this approach, which we initially introduced at the end of last year, is the first that allows you to assign a unique identity to an instance of an AI agent, and then be able to prove that that agent is, for example, representing you or representing a specific organization like a business or a government. If we want to be able to facilitate stablecoin payments at scale, agent-to-agent interactions and transactions, we need to know who we are interacting with. Who are we paying? We need to be able to ask those agents, take me to your leader, right? Who's your daddy? And right now, there's no way to be able to verify those agent instances. And so for both human coordination and agentic workflows, we need to be able to validate who's on the other side to make sure that the data and the value that we are exchanging or transacting is going to the appropriate party. And also to set rules around what can be sent, what can be shared with whom in a scalable manner. So when it sort of comes to how the capabilities of verification are used today, it is a pretty interesting patchwork in the crypto space of experimental solutions and a desire for novelty, even though there are actually a number of standards and pretty well-established practices throughout Web 2 that have been brought into being by the World Wide Web Consortium, the good people who brought us the internet, the reason for that www dot in the beginning of most URLs that you're visiting. And so at Billions Network, we combine leading edge frontier technologies from the blockchain space with technical standards and open standards that interoperate with the legacy world. And so we are able to safely bring data from the Web 2 universe on chain, as well as allow individuals to exist in the context of their current business or their current government, but bring cryptographic security to those operations.
That was a very heavy question, KG, and I am so glad that you gave such a good answer. I also wish to understand a little bit more about this. You spoke about we should know that where the money is going and understanding that. So when it comes to AI agents, how are those verified? Like, are you using SBTs? Are you using ZKs to verify the trust and layer of the AI agents by BFP?
That is a great question. So if you are interested in so maybe to back up for a quick second, the technical standards that we use, basically the containers for data, are sort of a combination of different tools when it comes to the Billions Network and how we operate. So the original data itself, for example, the location of where you live or your information from your passport, is contained in what's called a verifiable credential. So this is a signed JSON file, tamper-proof, so that it cannot be modified after it is created, and signed by the party that said it. And so a verifiable credential is basically just a file. It's very flexible, composable, kind of an open standard that's well recognized across the world. And then that credential stays in the custody of the person it's written about, in the same way that your physical credentials, like your ID card or your gym membership, stay in your physical wallet that you might carry around in your purse or your pocket. Then you are able to, using Billions, generate a zero-knowledge proof based on the information in the credentials written about you, so that you only share those proofs which do not contain the underlying data. So you can prove I am over the age of 18 without revealing your birthday. Now, this may sound like a pretty familiar example. That is because in 1997, Professor Larry Lessig, who is a professor at the Berkman Klein Center for the Internet at Harvard, suggested that one day this would be possible, that you might be able to visit an over 18 establishment or over 21 establishment like a bar. And instead of handing your driver's license to the doorman and exposing your eye color, your home address, how much you weigh in pursuit of gaining access to that establishment, instead, you could just give him a thumbs up or a green light, and he could trust in that data and ensure that you are an appropriate person to enter. And that is where we are today. Now, KG, to answer one of your earlier questions, why has this taken so long? I actually want to call out some of the underlying tech and its development over the past few years that has gotten us to this point. So when I started working full-time in crypto, if you wanted to generate a zero-knowledge proof, you would be sitting at your desktop computer, crossing your fingers and praying for about 30 minutes, if you were lucky, that this proof would generate correctly. And now, thanks to the hard work and development of my awesome teammates at Billions, that process can take less than 2 seconds on your mobile device while you're walking down the street, as long as you have internet access, or rather, as long as you have access to your device from anywhere. You actually don't even need access to the internet to be able to do this locally. And so the massive development and improvement in the performance of client-side libraries like Circom, RapidSnark, and SnarkJS has given us this new set of superpowers. And also back then, when I started working on this stuff, there were no layer 2 blockchains. There was no account abstraction. And so many of the technical capabilities that make this possible today previously did not exist. Now, to talk a little bit more about sort of your question around NFTs versus credentials versus proofs. I don't need to go into all of the details, but if you're curious about the nitty-gritty differences between soulbound tokens and credentials, Vitalik and I actually did a long debate on the Bankless podcast a couple years ago, discussing this in very fine detail. But there are a number of differences between a non-transferable NFT and a credential. Depending on the data that you want to expose on chain, you may not feel that it's appropriate to publish a public and permanent record of a certain trait or capability. Furthermore, when you lose access to your keys, you do not lose your identity. You are still you, even if you can't find those private keys. And so binding your identity immutably to keys you cannot rotate is a suboptimal experience for many. Additionally, if we want to be able to leverage these proofs in multiple environments, which is pretty accurate to how we exist, right? You are the same you who shows up to every chain. You do not become a new person every time you interact with a new protocol. And so allowing users to combine the powerful technologies of credentials and proofs makes it easy for you to carry your data with you. We lovingly refer to it as the data backpack experience, where you can bring your data with you just like you can other assets from one chain to another and even off chain into Web 2. And so the methods of verification that we use are exactly the same for both agents and for humans. The sort of approach to agent identity that we utilize, or as we call it, KYA, or Know Your Agent, allows the deployer of an instance of an AI agent to relate that agent back to them or the organization that they are part of. So that agent is then able to cryptographically prove that they are acting on your behalf. And then someone who's interacting with that agent can verify cryptographically that it is not an imposter, that it is in fact a permitted actor.
A quick question on that. Because there's going to be millions of agents out there. We're already seeing robotics kind of protocols where even without hands off, you can have your agent. You can, if you're in India, you can control it from all parts of the world. So there's going to be millions of agents, right? So how does like verification of an agent kind of work? Like, for example, if verification for me, I probably just take a photo, like you said, on your mobile, it just takes 2 seconds. And how does the verification for an agent work? Like, what is the process involved? And is it like, associating that agent to the human who's controlling it, or like how does that work?
Exactly that. And also, I want to note that one other method of verification that we support at Billions is actually based on documents. So you can download the Billions native application and take your passport, tap it to your phone, and securely pull the data out of the NFC chip that's been signed by the government, and use that as the basis of creating proofs about yourself. In addition, we actually have also integrated Aadhaar. And so if you are in India and you have an Aadhaar ID, you can utilize that as the basis of your identity as well. So when it comes to verifying agents, let's say I am an application developer and I want to be able to validate that an agent is representing a specific individual. Typically, without Billions Network, you might have to learn some complex cryptography in order to make that query. But we've actually created a query language that abstracts all of that away. And so we have a friendly developer tool called the Query Builder, where you can basically just choose some drop-down selections. I want to verify that the controller, that my counterparty that's sort of sitting on the other side of this agentic workflow is living in Singapore, or is above a certain age, or has a certain KYC status, whatever those things may be. And so you can create a very simple query, kind of drag and drop there without having to learn any new cryptographic techniques. And then as long as the deployer of that agent has made that data available to be proven, then it's a pretty straightforward process there.
Awesome. Uh, how do like what are some of the you have tons of chains as your clients and different protocols. How do you what are the like different ways you work with projects in crypto? We've talked about like managing airdrops for some of the protocols, managing the verification part, filtering out the symbols and stuff like that. Are there any other ways you work with projects power providing these identity systems? Yeah.
Yeah, there actually are. So you can, whenever you think about access control or an app or on-chain experience that is not totally open and permissionless, that is personalized or curated for certain users in some way, then that's when you can call us. So as you mentioned, many of our partners and colleagues think about Sybil resistance or separating out bots from unique people when they are doing value distribution on chain, such as an airdrop or a financial incentive distribution program. But we can be helpful in so many more ways because, for example, there are applications that have content that is appropriate for adults only. In fact, the FTC in the United States is now investigating 7 AI companies because they enabled AI companions to interact with children without appropriate age consents. And there was some inappropriate content that might have been exchanged there. So for builders that are curating experiences appropriate for users of a certain age alone, that's sort of where we can come in. We actually work with the European Commission as well on that front. So not just a challenge for those builders in the crypto space, but also in the legacy world as well. We also support our partners when access control is important for compliance. So, for example, in the universe of real-world assets, real-world asset issuers, sometimes depending on where they're operating, have rules around who's allowed to interact with those assets and who's allowed to transact with them after they've been created. So, one example there is we've worked with our colleagues over at DigiShares to bring tokenized fractional real estate to market in the United States, enabling ZK KYC to ensure that only appropriate parties are interacting with those assets.
Yeah, I think I recently heard someone on crypto Twitter say that there's going to be more pseudo anons going like the trend of pseudo anons is going to increase. I don't know if you know the CL, the cat, who is pretty well known. He bought a tank on without, just without, I don't know how he did it, but I see the future. He said that more and more anons are going to buy real estate or whatever in the real world without actually revealing their identity, right? Like, and this is pretty much how it's done, right? Like, they don't need to. Everything is done maybe on chain, and no one needs to know who they are. But underneath, everything is kind of verified and kind of greenlit, right? Like, I see that future where more and more anons become a trend, where people, like in this day and age, I don't think more and more people want to kind of put themselves out there. They want to be more private, and I just see that being a big trend as well. Do you agree?
I certainly agree. And, feelings aside, I think that is both a regulatory and a business trend as well. So, one of the challenges of our, current state of the internet is that many small and medium-sized businesses end up collecting a wild amount of data about their users. And those businesses often were not set up as data managers. They were set up as e-commerce companies or as consumer brands. And so this ends up being a very costly and high risk practice where they basically build a honeypot, a centralized database full of very sensitive information that, they're not cybersecurity companies and they now have to pay to curate and secure and, manage this information. When you add in the extensive regulation in some jurisdictions around how you can handle that data, what you need to do with it, the fact that you need to delete some of it upon the request of those users, it can actually become quite complex and costly to be able to manage data in this way. And so we are receiving more and more requests from businesses that want to be able to ensure that they have the right information about their customers without having to store it and manage it themselves. Additionally, from a regulatory environment perspective, there are age verification laws that are sweeping around the world right now. There are also all sorts of verifications that are being proposed for things like stablecoin payments, where the United States has recently requested public comment on types of technologies that can be both privacy preserving and can facilitate legal compliance. So exactly as you were noting, I think that this is trending from a technical, a regulatory, and a personal feeling perspective across the market.
Very interesting. And I'm so glad that the US government is now also coming forward and trying to figure out a way with the people rather than just, there's been a in a lot of regions because we keep interviewing people from a lot of developing regions and we see that there is a way and there's a time when the government comes around and then they're like, okay, now crypto and now blockchain. I'm so glad that there is like definitely there's someone who's already building the frontier tech for it. And I want to go back to the question that I had around, like you mentioned that there are multiple agents. There's like so many blockchains we're interacting. I still want to understand how does the verification work for billions across blockchains.
Sure, that's a great question. And I would add not only across blockchains, but off chain as well. And so let's say you want to be able to prove to a smart contract that you are over the age of 18 or that you're a person and not a bot. Um, you can interact with the friendly Billions application interface or SDK if you're inside of another application that's integrated our capabilities. So you don't have to leave that environment. You can stay in the app where you started. And then you simply generate a proof that you are over that certain age or that you are a human being based on the fact that you already have a credential or you've created a credential that contains that information. Then that proof, which is basically a little file, kind of like a verifiable thumbs up or a green light, can then be sent directly to a smart contract. That can also be presented in an application. It can also be presented even totally off chain as a QR code. And so there are a number of ways to be able to present this proof. And then on the verifier side, they consume that proof. They make sure that it hasn't been tampered with. And then that basically opens the door for you to be able to access that on-chain or in-app experience. So it's actually a pretty simple and straightforward exchange of just presenting a proof generated based on that underlying information.
Awesome. Uh, One of the questions I had earlier was, one of the things I always struggle with in crypto regarding KYC and verification is I always have to do it again, right? Every time I have to use it, different apps, every time, like if I want to on ramp some funds, it's always different provider and stuff. Is it like, for example, I do the verification once with Billions, and every time it's integrated into an app, I don't need to do it again. It's already there, and it can immediately be kind of verified in that way. Is that how it kind of works Like I just say to do it once, and every time I don't need to kind of, like, for example, in India we have this thing called DigiLocker. So all the verification documents are already in that thing. So whenever you go into a new app, it just says access to DigiLocker, and you just give access and immediately checks it. So is that like how you're kind of thinking embedding into these different protocols and apps?
Like that, but better. Because instead of every time that you want to verify, that you want to prove your traits, instead of revealing all of that underlying information inside your DigiLocker, instead you just send a proof. So you can generate an infinite number of proofs based on your one credential, so that you do not have to go through that whole process to prove that you're a unique person or prove that you're over a certain age. Once you have that proof or that credential in your application or in your custody, then you can create as many proofs based on it as you would like. Now, I will say, I also am right there with you. I do not care for the fact that I spend an insane amount of time filling out the same forms over and over and over again. And I will note, this is not the fault of the application development teams. This is not the fault of the builders. This is a requirement of the law. Because if you are interacting with specific services that require KYC, the government in many jurisdictions requires that a business keep a copy of the underlying information about you. And so if you're interacting with a different application, they have to keep their own separate copy. Now we are starting to see actually some very cool solutions that both comply with this law and prevent the need to redo this process over and over again. And so we are working closely with our colleagues at IDOS, which is a KYC and verification network, to enable ZK KYC that is reusable. So keep your eyes peeled. We'll have some pretty exciting updates on that front, but we are basically working with regulators and with builders to try to address that exact problem that you've described.
Awesome. Uh, Another thing that I wanted to kind of give you as comparison for our audience is when they hear identity systems, verification, probably the first thing they think about is Worldcoin, because there's so much in the news and so much of attention they kind of grab. Could you kind of give us like how does Billions compare to Worldcoin? They used Orb. Uh, what are some of the differences in how the systems work? And yeah, what are your thoughts on like Worldcoin and how does Billions compare to it?
You know, I think that WorldCoin is the best Sam Altman meme coin the world has ever seen. I think they're a fantastic proprietary camera company, but they have a very, very different approach than we do to verification and identity. So at Billions Network, we build with open standards and permissionless networks in a multi-chain and legacy system interoperable manner. Whereas with WorldCoin, they utilize proprietary proofs, so do not integrate with open standards. They use a centralized approach. They have a centralized permissioned server and account model where they can arbitrarily delete your account at any time if they feel like it. We cannot, so it's a little different there. They are optimized for a single chain environment, whereas ours is really optimized for portability across different networks. At Billions Network, we do not require any proprietary hardware. You can use the phone or computer that you already have at home instead of the Orb device, which, just on a personal level, I think is like pretty creepy. But I also, I think we take a very different approach when it comes to the regulatory environment. WorldCoin has been banned and sanctioned around the world by many governments for their inappropriate use of data about children, their inappropriate use of data that is personal or biometric and sort of specifically regulated in different jurisdictions. And at Billions Network, we and our team have never been sanctioned or banned by any government. In fact, we work hand in hand with governments around the world. So, we definitely have great respect for teams that are taking big swings at big problems. And as far as proprietary camera companies go, I think they're a very impressive one. But we are very, very different businesses.
Also want to understand, like, from what I saw, a lot of people rush to Worldcoin for the monetary benefits and not really realizing that what they're selling is literally them, like a part of themselves, not exactly themselves, like with their eye scans and a lot. I want to understand if Billions also has like a similar reward programs when people verify that they are like actual humans and they're not like fake accounts.
We are not in the business of buying eyeballs, if that's your question. But yeah, definitely, I have heard quite a lot of that. That the reason for interacting with some protocols is because people are being paid. And there's no other reason to interact or no other function that they're trying to achieve. We find that, with Billions Network, many of our now nearly 2 million users encounter our technology because they are in the process of accomplishing some other goal or some other interaction that requires identity verification. So in that way, the value flows are a little bit opposite. We are a revenue generating business who makes possible these types of capabilities in a privacy preserving way. We do not financially incentivize the trade of sensitive information.
Understood.
Awesome. Uh, yeah, I think we've covered a lot of ground here. How does Billions, what are some of the new functionalities or uh, we talked about identity, we talked about ZK proofs, but is there anything else coming down the pipeline that you're really excited about?
Whew, you guys are asking for alpha leaks. I've got a lot of them. Maybe for some piping hot tea, we are looking forward to our token generation event here in the coming months. So very much looking forward to leveraging new and more decentralized aspects to our practice. We recently closed a community round with our partners over at Kaido, where we welcomed more than 1,500 different contributors from the community to participate. We are very much a community first project, and so that was a really important aspect of our growth. From the product side, we have quite a lot coming, and so are especially excited about bringing these capabilities to friendlier scale with our enterprise partners, allowing you to do things like prove the fact that you are specifically an employee at a particular company or that you are affiliated with a specific organization. In addition to all of that, that data that you can prove from, the information and assets and documents that you currently have. We're also very excited to continue doing what we're doing, which is supporting teams that are distributing value on chain, that are building app ecosystems in their protocol environments, and that want to allow users to be able to have awesome personalized experiences without having to spend their entire life filling out forms.
Awesome. The another question like I had before we wrap things up is like how do I want to kind of simplify it for our audience. Do you is Billions in the spectrum of privacy or identity? I know that there's kind of an overlap there, because I think like the next big kind of, I don't want to say meta because it's so cliche right now, but kind of narrative is privacy. If privacy fails, kind of crypto fails. We're at that stage. Do you see Billions as more of an identity coordination system between AI and human because that's where we are headed, or on the more on the privacy side where it's more embedded in the crypto space and it'll kind of mask payments, it'll help with identity, and where do you see how do you kind of reference it where maybe a few years from now to like a normal user?
So we believe in privacy by design. Privacy is not a novelty or a meta to us. It is a foundational part of our practice in everything that we do. So, in that way, I would say, we are not a privacy project. However, our zero knowledge libraries are the most broadly used ZK libraries on Earth, from TikTok to HSBC to just about every university that teaches about zero knowledge proofs. And so, I would humbly note that my colleagues, I think, are the best in the business when it comes to scaling privacy-based technologies that leverage the devices that we already have at home. However, I would definitely place us more squarely in the world of verifiable data and enabling coordination between humans and machines.
Awesome. And like I'm very happy that you are directing your attention in that way, that privacy by design, because I feel like a lot of people, when it comes to the crypto race, and now forgetting that that is the reason we are here. And it was lovely having you on the pod, Evan, and we're so happy. This was so good. And thank you for taking out the time. And yeah, we hope to see you soon with more alpha and having you again on the pod.
Should definitely do it after the TG is over as well.
Yes, yes, yes.
Say less. Well, you guys, thank you so much for having me today. For our dear listeners, please remember crypto is like cryptocurrency, but also crypto like cryptography. So privacy by design is always an option for us as builders. I'm Evan McMillan, co-founder of Billions Network. You can always follow us on X at billions_NTWK. I'm always online at Proven Authority, and I will see all of you beautiful people on chain.
Thanks so much, Evan.